everyone, and hello, Shobha.
Hello, Reena.
It's so lovely to share the stage with you and be able to talk to you about this wonderful book that you've written recently. I mean, Shobha is a writer who writes for adults and for children. But today we are going to concentrate sort of on the book that she's written for children, which can also be read by adults.
I'll read some of it.
Yes. So we start straight away in poetry. Poetry for children as such, children have got, you can read them poetry, they love poetry, they love rhyme, they love verse. But when you talk to them about the different meters or the different styles of poetry, children feel a little nervous. And Shobha's made it very easy for them to understand. So Shobha, will you tell us a little more about this wonderful book you've written?
Thank you so much, Reena. Thank you, Bangalore, for coming out to listen to a children's poet. We've all heard some wonderful, magical verses from so many others. One of these days, I'm going to write some other kind of poetry as well. I'm delighted to be here. This particular book, it's called It's Time to Rhyme, and it's the Indian edition of a book that was published in America. The poems are the same, the illustrations are different, and obviously been produced differently. And that was called How Many Lines in a Limerick? It was released, unfortunately, during COVID, so it hasn't had the chance to be in the hands of as many children as we've had with this book, which is, touch wood, won an award as well. So I approached this writing exercise in a particular way. One of it is that I was encountering children wherever I traveled who said poetry was sort of intimidating to them. They found it opaque. They said, there's figurative language, what is that? And there's rhyme schemes, there's all these meters and rules and all of that. And so they weren't as excited about it. Now, this isn't all the children I encountered. There were many who said they were writing poems at home and they loved it. I grew up loving poetry, I mean, of all kinds. I made up my own poems about best friends or animals or whatever when I was growing up. And I continue to do, I like the musicality of words. So it was the rhythm of words that appealed to me. Now, of course, some of the poems we've heard from our adult authors have been in free verse. But I was working with meter and very often simple couplets when I was a child. This book is, it essentially is introducing 9 different poetic forms to children. So we have fairly, what you learn in school, like a sonnet is introduced, but then we also have some unusual, poetic forms like a nonnette. Now, I don't know if any of you know a nonnette.
I didn't. Absolutely. When I read Shobha's book, that's when I discovered what a nonnette was.
Well, I'd heard the term, but I'd never written one. And so, but what I do with the forms is that I present the form in the shape of the form itself. So a sonnet, which I won't read to you, but it's a 14-line poem. It has an octave and a sestet. It has the iambic pentameter, which is the long and short syllables. So you hear that da-dum beat to it. And then it ends with a couplet, which is very often the case in Elizabethan sonnets. So we're not getting, this is not an instructional book, but I wanted to show that to children, how to write a sonnet. And then I have example poems that are entertaining that the children can relate to. So we have a form and then we're framing it in a particular way. So I'm going to read you the nonnette and you'll hear, it's a very short poem. Sorry that I haven't marked the page, just one second. It's a very short poem, and I'll tell you when I read out what is a nonnette, you'll learn what it is. And then I'll read you my example poem, page 21. So you have a sense of what kids can do with it. Nonnettes take an unusual form. The first line has 9 syllables, the second line only 8, the third line just 7, the fourth only 6, the fifth has 5, the sixth 4, and on end. So that's a nonnette, and I've written it to you so that you know what it is. And then we have
what I'd like to say over here is that while I was reading the nonnette, as she's explained it, the immediate reaction is to start counting. So as a child also, you would just start counting the lines and the syllables.
I bet all the kids do that as well.
Of course.
So I had to make sure I counted it correctly. And I wrote a fun poem after that, again to illustrate a nonnette. Your loving hug, the poem is called My Friend. Your loving hug wipes away my tears. Your smile makes me smile back as well. When I'm alone, if you're there, things seem so much better. Friends are not just fun, they brighten days, they fill hours, and bring joy.
That's lovely, absolutely beautiful.
Thank
So,
you.
would
Well,
you-
there's others as well.
Yes,
but
would
go
you
ahead.
like to talk of any other form?
So we have some simple forms, some difficult forms. We have a sonnet, which is simple. I'm happy to read that to you if you're interested. We have acrostics, we have limericks. So the idea is that kids find something that resonates with them as well. And the teachers who I've visited a lot of schools with this book have said that it's been an incredibly fun writing exercise for them, because what they do is they read out the description of what the form is, and then they all sit and write their own poems. And I've done some workshops where children have written their own poems as well, and we do exactly the same thing. So we start out with something simple like an acrostic. Yes. And I'm sure everybody knows what an acrostic is. In America, it's usually very often found in all those Hallmark cards. So, you have the word spelt vertically down, start each sentence with a letter, and then you describe whatever it is you're talking about. I could read you an acrostic if you like. It's page 18, very simple, if anybody picks up the book. And I have the word acrostic spelled down, so you can listen for the A, the C, the R, O, S, T, I, C in each line as I start out. Each line starts with the letter. An acrostic verse is fun to create. Count the letters for lines, this one has 8. Read and write the first letter or first word of each line so it describes it much better, the word or phrase that you find. It's a special form whose message is clear, creating a word as it's meant to appear. So we use the form, we illustrate that, and then the example was called Homework, the Dawdler's Lament. And I've spelt homework all the way down. Homework can be such a chore. Often I lose my way. My mind, it wanders here and there. Each time I'd rather play. Why must we always have to toil or do our sums and read? Recess all day will not spoil kids. More fun is what we need.
Lovely. That's so nice. That's wonderful. Poetry for children, there aren't many poets in India, at least, writing for children. What do you think is the reason for that? I mean, we do write a lot. There are a lot of story writers. In fact, children's literatures come up so much in India,
Right.
but not so many poets.
Well, I mean, not everybody wants to work with the poetic medium, perhaps. I think a lot of publishers seem to think, and I've heard this said before during the course of the day, that prose sells more easily than poetry. So someone's got to be willing to take a chance with it.
Yes,
However, I think it's wonderful because you hear the music of the words so much better. You remember vocabulary so much better. I started my children's section yesterday by reciting a tongue twister that I learned when I was a kid. I truly did. I learned it when I was probably their age, when I was 8 years old, and I still haven't forgotten it. It's Betty Botter. I don't know if anybody knows that one. But it's a good fun, and it's a lot of bees. And as I said, the repetition of words, the sound of the music, the rhyme itself, it's easier to remember.
Yes.
So I've written, for instance, a picture book that HarperCollins published last year, which is for young children. It's available outside. I'm sorry, I forgot to pick it up to show you. It's a very sweet little book called Parvati the Elephant's Very Important Day. And it's a story, but I decided I would write it in rhyming couplets. So the idea is that a picture book, again, are books that are illustrated and usually read to a non-reader. So what I wanted to do is write it in a rhyming form, because the first time, I read to my children when they were a few months old. Children are listening to the sound of the reader, the parent's voice, the mother's musical sound, or the father's voice. And so they're listening to the sound of the words without obviously understanding the vocabulary or the words. They're looking at pictures. They begin by really learning phonetics and language skills through that sound. And that sound, when it's in a rhyming form, is even better, at least in my perspective. So that's why I wrote that particular book in rhyme.
In fact, children love rhymes and verses. And what you teach them right in the beginning when they're kids and they cannot read are the nursery rhymes, in your own language.
That's
or
right.
in the English language. It's poetry, it's
Yeah.
rhymes that you're teaching them. And later on, I have realized, I look after a publication as well. It's called Amar Chitra Katha. We have books for children. So in all our stories, for the really, really tiny ones, we put in a lot of verses and songs. So I think the storyteller does take the help of poetry and music and songs to make this story more interesting
I
for
think it's
children.
happening. I think it is happening. And Tulika, for instance, has a number of, I've had a few of my poems included in their anthologies.
Right.
And they're doing a lot of that. They're doing bilingual books as well. So there are publishers who are taking that chance. And it's a lot of fun, definitely. Kids do enjoy it. Once they pick it up, they love it.
My favorite poem in this book, as I told you, was Living Situations.
Do you want me to read that?
Will you read that out
Sure.
for me? Yeah, it's
Thank you for bearing with me and listening to some children's poetry. So the second half of the book, what I say, and I'll do that for you, just one second. I've divided this book into two sections, and I've introduced, as I said, 9 different poetic forms, and then we break it up, and I say to the children or to the reader or to anyone who has this book, so we've seen a few forms and we've worked out some rhyme. We now know the norms and how rhythm keeps time. Let's take what we've read, have a good look around, write our world in new verses, fresh forms that abound. We'll see how far the English language can go. Learning is such fun, poems even more so. And then I introduce, I'm going to read that poem to you, but I introduce a number of different poems that actually sort of show our place in the world as global citizens. It's all about the fact that we share a planet, that we're all so similar, our impulses are the same. It's always been something that I've sort of woven into most of my stories, because I went away as a teenager to America, but I always came back home to India all the time, and my children the same. So I truly feel we can have our feet in many parts of the world.
And it's become easier now.
And it has become so much easier now. So I will read you Living Situations. Just one second. And this is sort of a little bit more modern, and that's why you liked it, I guess. Living Situations. I live at home with Mommy and Pa. Geeta lives with both her dads. Henry goes back and forth each week between his parents' pads. Jose lives with his abuela. She takes him everywhere. Ivy and Lily stay with fathers when they're not in daycare. Everyone's family is unique and different from all the rest, for when a home is full of love and cheer, that family is blessed.
I found this really beautiful and, contemporary in thought, and so easy for a parent to pick up and read out to a child and explain that, there are different situations in different families.
Absolutely.
And nothing is, odd or out of the way or, so acceptability, inclusivity.
Kids need to, exactly.
Yes, and they need to be exposed to.
And really, all of us who write,
Yes.
we have a responsibility, because what youngsters read today is what informs them as adults later.
Absolutely.
And so I definitely take the task seriously.
You've also written a biography. Would you like to talk about the biography?
Yeah,
that
that's
you've written?
available outside as well. So
Yes.
when I published a few books in India, I had Penguin, the publisher, wanted me to write the story of my mother's life. And they wanted a conventional biography, but as you can see, I haven't been very conventional in almost anything I've written. I always bring in slight different elements. So I finally sort of managed to persuade them that I would write the book, but I would write it from a slightly different perspective. It's 13 chapters. It's a tribute to my mother. But as I say in the book, it's really a tribute to women everywhere. Women who sometimes are in the background, women who strive and struggle, women of all walks of life. And my mother was an ordinary woman, as she says. She says, why are you writing a book about me? I didn't invent anything. Why don't you write about your brother or somebody else? And I said, no, I want to write your story because, at the age of 82, she renewed her driver's license. She's quite a remarkable woman. She inspired all of us, all the generations, including grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren, and she still works on WhatsApp. She's managed to learn, though sometimes she forwards things without looking at it, so we end up getting things that we don't want to look at. But it was a wonderful, she has inspired all of us in so many ways that I said I will look at her life using the timeline of a biography. But again, I've written it a little differently. I've not ventriloquized her, but I have the first part of each chapter in her voice. So it's written in first person. And then the second half is in the narrator's voice. And so that is a little unusual. I also am essentially looking at each chapter to inform us, to sort of, any one of us, to sort of give us something to sort of learn from. So in a sense, I don't want to call it a self-help book, but it's a cross between, I think it's being marketed in Amazon and all as both self-help and memoir. Yeah, so because each chapter starts with a little well-known aphorism, and each chapter takes from the aphorism and sort of explains that particular quality of her life. So for instance, and these are aphorisms that all of us have read over the years. For instance, there's a Tagore quote that says, "You can't cross the seas merely by looking at it." So in other words, you've got to take that plunge, you've got to take that, put yourself out there. And so that particular chapter then illustrates that aspect of her life. And we go all the way from when she was born in a little village in Kollangoad, Kerala, to today, sending WhatsApp forwards and still telling us that we haven't done enough. So that was that book.
So I am getting the signal that there's just 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And so we open the floor to questions now. Any questions from the audience?
Would love to. Somebody at the back there? Wow, no questions, so we can continue to talk. Oh, there is a question there.
Not a question per se, but just a comment or my thought.
Is your mic on? No.
Yeah, that's my voice. I think it's soft. So.
I believe we have to put it right near our mouth. That's what he told me.
Okay, is it better now?
Thank you, yes.
So just two thoughts. The first thought was, I think, whether by choice or design or it just happened, you took the poem on Friends, and today is a Friends Day. And we are in the room with the best possible set of friends we could have, who are all poets around. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And the second follow-up thought, I think we had 2 days of poetry which were pushing the boundaries, talking profound stuff. But this was one session which we could connect back to the child. And I think as many budding poets who are planning to start out the journey of poetry, this is one session where we get to become back the children once again. So thank you for this wonderful session.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
So talking of children writing poetry, I know, I started off writing poetry when I was really small, 4-line verse, and I showed it to my father, and of course he had to say it was wonderful. When did you start writing?
So I did the same.
Yeah.
And some of it was a little bit of laziness as well. When we were set out to write something and sit quietly for a while, I would write poetry while, my brother would think of some big imaginative story, and my sister was thinking of riddles or something. She's a little bit younger than I am, but I used to always write poetry because I thought it's shorter and I could finish the whole thing quickly. But I love the rhyming as well. As I told you, I like the musicality of words. So we played word games from when we were little. I grew up in India where I didn't have TV till I was 12 or 13 years old, and most of the time the English programs were very limited. We had Kisan and Doordarshan 1 and 2 with agriculture shows. Television was not a draw like it is to children today.
Only on Wednesdays, I think, when we had Chitrahar.
Oh, yes. Right. We listened to music on the radio.
Yes.
Binaka,
Absolutely.
Geetmala, and a whole lot of
All
other
that.
wonderful songs. And we listened to music, we danced to music, and we played word games. And that was our fun. And we smuggled books in our mother's bag when we went out to dinners so we could read instead of engage with people.
Exactly.
We all loved reading and words.
Yes, we did. So, any questions from you all? Okay. Oh, then another question.
Hello. I come from the field of education, and in this digital world, it's very difficult. In our childhood days, we used to pick up, I've read all the series of Amar Chitra Katha, all the
Thank
books,
you.
especially while traveling. But nowadays, kids are so glued to those gadgets, making them read. And we made in school English reading program and many reading programs compulsory mandatory to develop that interest. How do you inspire children to read?
So, is that addressed to me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've encountered children who tell me that they're voracious readers, so I'm very, very hopeful now. I always say there isn't a bad book or a wrong book. I tell parents if children want to read comic books, that's fine. They're reading graphic novels, it's okay. If they're reading poetry, great. You know, they can read what they want to read. That's a way of sort of getting engaged in that process. And then I'm telling you, once you've discovered the world of books, that's what you want to do. Sometimes what happens is, first of all, do you have books in the home? I ask parents who sometimes tell me my child doesn't read. The thing is, the habit is to be cultivated at home at a young age before the children cultivate their own habits. If we all sat around, including mother, father, sisters, brothers, together in the home and say, okay, now we finish this show, let's all read a book, and then perhaps you could share the story at dinner time. You know, having those kind of habits is one of the ways to go, truly. I mean, there's nothing, if you force something on children, they're not usually interested. But if they pick up a, you know, whose quote was it? There's no such thing as a bad book. It's just that they haven't picked up the right one or something like that. It's true, you know, if they find something that interests them, they're going to want to do that. And even if it means they're reading the same book many times, my daughter was a very voracious reader. My son would read, you know, the same book again and again many times, and it used to frustrate me in the beginning, but that was okay, and by the end of it all, he knew it by heart, you know. So everybody has a different style, they do things differently. I think encouraging them by having books around in the home, starting very early. I'm telling you, I have grandchildren now, and they were read to when they were a few months old, and each of them in their living space, wherever their bed was, they had a library where their books were. And the kids, parents would initially pick up the book and read to the child. By the time the child was walking, we're talking steps, the children would go and pull the books from there, the ones, probably because the colors were good or the pictures were nice, and then they would read it. And then later, as they got older, they're asking for more and more books. So it's a habit that we can build like any other habit, truly.
Yes, sir, but it begins at home.
It begins at home.
And
absolutely.
And it is carried to the school.
It's carried to the
Yes,
schools.
yes,
absolutely.
Yes. That's a pathway. Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question.
Somebody's
Okay, so I have one question. So from previous 1 2 year, like I have tried to write everything, whatever comes in my observation. But one thing I have noticed is that there are pretty interesting observations that comes in our everyday life, but that I am not able to convert into poetry. So can you give some guidance on how to translate these observations into poetry so that it can be made interesting to read also?
Well, that's a little complicated to sort of answer in a question. But as the other writer said recently, we really just have to keep reading. If you are interested in the medium of poetry as a genre, read a lot of other poets. Your thoughts have to be put down on paper as you think of them, and the music will come to it the more familiar you are with the genre. So if you read a lot of poetry, you get a better sense of what you want to do. There are also workshops. These days I find a lot of poets are moonlighting as teachers as well. There are many online workshops you can take. There are instructional books. Read a lot of poetry, attend some classes, share your work with others, see if it works, see what resonates. That's all I can suggest.
I would add to that and say that, you know, if you have a diary, just write something down every day.
Right.
Write it for yourself.
Exactly.
Write it for whoever's in the house with you. You know, write it in any form that you want to, and it'll flow into whatever is comfortable for you. It'll flow into poetry, it'll flow into prose, but you'll be able to do it. Don't give up.
That's a great point. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Is there time for another question? There's someone at the back who's got a raised hand.
Oh, we're
Oh,
done.
we're done?
Okay.
Sorry. You can ask me outside. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Reena.
Thank you, Shobha.
Really
Thank you so
appreciated
much.
it. Thank you.